episode of Stay Hot. I'm Blaiden Kirk, joined as always by my two favorite co-hosts of all time, Matthew Sponhour and Theo Ash. And today we're back with some more fantasy football advice. You can take it if you want, but just know that my track record on fantasy teams over the last few years is pretty bad. So Matt and Theo have a little bit better history than I do when it comes to fantasy projections. But before we get into this, we're talking about fantasy quarterbacks. We've talked about receivers, running backs. Today we're talking about quarterbacks. But before we get into that, Matt, Theo, how are you guys doing on this beautiful, beautiful Sunday evening?
I'm doing well. I'm up in Massachusetts on the coast. And this morning I was on a whale watching tour and we saw some whales. It was sick. Those whale watching guides swing the boat like right around towards them. I was like, are we going to run these dudes over, these whales? But they managed to avoid it and they were like diving and feeding like right next to the boat. It was pretty cool. I was moved by the whales. Such elegant creatures.
And they're big.
They're huge.
Yeah.
One of the whales we saw is like the second biggest animal on Earth after the blue whale. It's like, damn.
Wow.
That one's kind of far away, though.
I feel like whales are kind of hard to conceptualize in size because most of us don't ever see them.
Yeah, I mean, and they're under the water, so you only ever see a little bit of them at a time, even when you're looking at them. Like, you might see their mouth come up and then it goes back down, or you might see the back of their back come up and then dive down with the tail. So you never get like a complete view of them or what they're doing. It's just kind of like scanning the water around you, waiting for something to bubble up, and then here it comes out of the deep. It's kind of it's almost eerie to know that they're around you, right? They're under you, and then it comes up and disappears again. I was really scared.
What's the biggest land animal? Hippos? Moose?
It's a good question.
Bear? Polar bear, maybe? Hippo's got to be bigger than polar bear.
Elephant,
Hippos
right?
are pretty
Elephant.
big.
Oh, elephant.
Elephant, yeah.
Yeah, easy to forget about some of these. Giraffe also got a big one.
Giraffes are more tall, but I don't know if I'd say they're big, like pure mass, but
I haven't seen anything quite as majestic as a whale, but there's been a lot of lizards out in Cincinnati. The street lizards.
That blows my mind how many lizards there are.
It's crazy.
In Ohio.
I went on a walk
I just
around
don't think
block.
of that as being a Midwest thing.
Since they got, I forget how exactly, but they got like transported here in the 60s or whatever. I mean, there's
Nice.
You'll go out on a walk around the block, you'll see like 20 of them, man. They're always, if you go on a run, you got to be careful. Sometimes they'll like run right under you.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. I love lizards. I love reptiles.
Yeah, me too.
So that was good. Outside of that, an invasive species, but in like a bad way for them, because like it's like pythons are an invasive species, but it's because they're bad because they have no natural predators, so they can just kill everything. But these lizards, they just like hang out, and I feel like they're too tiny to really do anything.
They eat bugs, and then other things that eat bugs or like worms or something can't because there's so many lizards, and then that hurts things on their level in the food chain.
You know what? That's a very good analysis of
the ecosystem. Food. I know my shit.
You are the bird guy, so
if I wasn't a sports guy, I'd be a biologist. That was my second. My second.
You could have been like me, man. You could have majored in biology, and then you could be a biologist and a sports analyst.
Yeah, your job relates more to this podcast though, because you do like all the tech for it, and
that's true
and shit. And if I was a biologist, there's absolutely nothing I could do. Like you designed the whole Blaiden.com website with the quarterback ranking quiz, right? And my biology degree would not have helped me do that in any way, and would not have promoted or advanced the podcast in any way. But speaking of quarterback rankings, that is what we're kind of doing today.
We're talking about sleepers and busts, but I want to say this before we get into it. fantasy bust quarterbacks are like not bad in the same way that you might think a top-rated running back is bad in fantasy or a top-rated wide receiver is bad. A bad fantasy quarterback is like not finishing as quarterback 2 or 3. They're finishing maybe as quarterback 9 or 10, and they still put up good numbers, but the gap between those two things is a lot smaller. So I don't know if I would call these guys bust, because I like several of them, and I'm sure that they're going to put up the stats that people think they're going to. I don't know.
I feel like the main thing is you just can't have too many stinkers. Like maybe when you add it all up, they all might finish closer together than the top wide receivers, that is, top running backs, top tight ends. Tight ends is kind of suffers the same fate because there's just not that many of them on each team. But if you have a quarterback that has a bad week, like, it really isn't good for your team, because they still do score the most points. So that's kind of the way I went into this, is like, who is just going to consistently get points? I don't know. I didn't want people who were maybe going to be up and down, up and down, up and down.
That's probably not a bad way to look at it. I'm trying to think.
Enough.
Who wants to go first? Theo, do you want to give your
sure,
first
why
sleeper?
not? A sleeper? Okay.
Yeah, I figured we'll start positive.
We talk about the same guys every time on this podcast, but
Yeah,
for
I
me,
know.
it's Justin Herbert. It's Justin Herbert.
Oh,
Everybody's groaning. They don't want to hear me talk
man.
anymore.
I disagree with that one too, is the thing.
Good.
Like, genuinely and honest to God, not on some like stupid Herbert fails again, stupid Herbert loses 13 games or whatever. Like,
You're on
genuinely,
some
I don't think
genuine
like, I
genuine
honestly,
hatred towards me.
yes,
You
yeah,
you
It's
genuinely
specifically
think
an
I'm
attack
stupid right now.
against your
it's
character.
exactly what I'm getting at.
Okay, so Matt genuinely thinks I'm stupid right now, which is good, because I prepared for this. I thought maybe
Did
this
you?
could happen. Well, I guess my main thing on why I think Herbert is underrated right now is he's just never been as bad as his current ADP. On Fantasy Pros, he's the quarterback 16 right now, below like Jayden Daniels and Jared Goff. And it's like, he's never been lower than, I think, 11, at least on a per game standpoint. And his situation has been pretty bad through all of it, to me. Like, the coaching has not been great. The offensive coordinator situation has not been great. His receiving situation has been better than this, because Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were proven and productive. And that's the thing that's really hurting Herbert, is the fact that no one quite knows how it's going to shake out. But I do have faith in Herbert, the quarterback. I think that he's top 5. So his supporting cast would really have to sell him for him to take a hit this big. And I just think that a quarterback this good is going to find a way with the wide receivers, just somehow, some way, if the line is good. And that's kind of what I'm banking on. I'm banking on a protected Justin Herbert, a cohesive offensive vision, and the skill position talent just kind of falls into the competent category. But maybe I'm just looking at the worst. Maybe I'm overrated. Maybe I'm overestimating.
Whip Route put out a tweet yesterday saying that a lot of receivers should be out here switching positions to corner or safety, and they could probably play at a better college. And I was like, so you're telling me the Chargers don't have a lot of bad receivers, they just have a lot of really good safeties. When it comes to your feet, eBay's got your back, because with eBay's authenticity guarantee, real experts are checking your sneakers, every stitch down to the sole. Me personally, I'm a big fan of a classic Air Force, or maybe a nice suede or leather boot, but whatever it is that you're adding to the lineup next, head to eBay. From the drop to your doorstep, eBay does not play with your sneaker game. Just look for that blue check mark. So ensure your next purchase is the real deal. Visit ebay.com for terms.
Another tweet that I just saw is from a Twitter user, Double Doink. And he just tweeted, talking about what will be the single worst NFL position group in the coming season, in parentheses, and then he says, if they can just be okay, then, and I realize that's what I'm doing. I'm talking about the single worst NFL position group and just saying, oh, they could just be okay. That's literally exactly what I'm doing. But I think if Herbert has time behind an offensive line that I think will be good, I do think that the positional group isn't going to like totally sink his production. Like they might lose, it might be inefficient, but I still think that he can. I don't know. I think he can outperform QB16.
If you were Harbaugh, what would your game plan be going into this season, knowing the group of receivers that you have?
I mean, I'd want to run the football. I really would. They always kind of have. But I also think that your quarterback is Justin Herbert, and you've got to throw it a decent amount as well. So I would want as balanced as I could be, I think. Like I wouldn't want to be necessarily at the bottom of the NFL passing rate when my quarterback is as good as Justin Herbert. But I also don't expect them to be at the very top. I expect them to be kind of somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Of pass rate at least.
Blaiden, I don't entirely disagree with your point there. I feel you that Herbert is obviously still a great quarterback, and I think he'll be able to get a decent amount of work done even with not fantastic wide receivers. But there's a few things that make me nervous when drafting him, or make me feel like he's just not a sleeper, I guess would be the way to put it. Number one is that while he has never had like a superstar supporting cast, this is easily the worst supporting cast he's gone into a season with. Not even debatably close. Unless you think Ladd McConkey is going to end up being, maybe a Pro Bowl type guy, maybe a 1,300, 1,400, 1,500 yard type guy, in which case, then I'll agree with you a lot, actually. But it's still going to be Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston out there, which makes me, kind of nervous. Because like even you look at like a Buffalo, for instance, where it's like, yeah, they don't have a star, but I think I like Shakir and I like their tight ends, and I think Keon can come in there, and it's like, okay, there's a decent number of dudes. With the Chargers, it feels like you're going to have guys who just aren't going to consistently win at all, and it doesn't really matter how good Herbert is. That's going to affect them. On top of that, finishing as quarterback 11 last year feels like a pretty honest way to judge what Herbert might look like this upcoming season, right? I mean, I don't know why I would expect a major jump from him, considering that, yeah, he's going to be playing on an offense that probably isn't going to want to throw as much. I mean, you look back at his past seasons, he's not only had a better supporting cast, but he's been throwing it like 700 times a year. I don't think that he's going to hit that number with Harbaugh. And then on top of that, it feels like even though he is a mobile guy, he doesn't really have the rushing upside that a lot of other dudes do. So even if you can get past the fact that his supporting cast got worse from a receiver standpoint, and even if you think Harbaugh doesn't signal a downtick in just like the number of attempts he gets per game, I feel like quarterback 11 is probably more on the upside for him. And I'm struggling to think, again, in a bad offense, what would need to happen for him to beat that outside of just like throwing a bunch of touchdowns. But Harbaugh like kind of gets down there and loves to run it in. So I don't even know if that's going to break well for him. Herbert is certainly more talented than quarterback. I'm seeing him at 14, which is where he's being taken. But is he actually going to put up better numbers than like, I don't know, Jared Goff, who's in a very good offense and is going to throw it a lot?
Right.
I don't feel like that's a guarantee at all. And without like the big upside of like, I don't know, some other guys who are around there, maybe a Lawrence who finished around, I want to say like quarterback 15, 14 last year in points per game, but could have that big season and has had a bunch of big changes. I think there's just other guys I'd rather go with who are either more reliable or could really boom.
I'm curious to see how no more Austin Eckler will affect Herbert, if that will be a more negative or positive thing. Eckler has obviously been a great weapon for them, but when he's consistently your target leader year after year, I could see his absence actually
maybe turning into more runs.
Yeah, maybe turning into more runs, or maybe turning into more passes down the field, which could impact Herbert's numbers positively? I don't know. I guess in 2021, their leading receiver in terms of targets was Josh Palmer because Keenan Allen got hurt. Mike Williams didn't play all the games. And still, Herbert was QB, I think, still 11 at that point on a per game basis. So I don't know. I just feel like he has been dealing with issues. And I think I'm also I'm kind of a Chargers believer again this year just because I like Harbaugh. And I think the other thing is his schedule is very easy. Like they play in a division. There's 4 very easy pass defenses, I'd say. The Broncos and the Raiders, maybe, in his division. And looking at this website, they give him the 5-star schedule ranking. So I'm going to trust their numbers on that. I don't know. I just think their offensive line is going to be good. I think their defense is probably going to be slightly better. I don't know if they'll make the playoffs or anything, but I do think Herbert can succeed in this kind of situation, at least to the point where QB 16 is kind of anticipating more of a fall off that I think will happen. Like Herbert has overcome all kinds of issues. I think like maybe those issues still exist, but they're not going to get like way worse, even though his receivers are gone and his running back is gone. Because I was always a little bit in the camp of those weapons are overrated anyway, right? So now if everybody is like, oh, all of his great weapons are gone, I'm kind of like, they weren't that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that they were great weapons, but they did produce.
They did,
right?
Produce.
And it's like,
how much
is Josh Palmer gonna produce? Mm-hmm. How much is I don't even know who else. Lad McConkey gonna produce
a lot.
I'd rather have him than Jayden Daniels. That's all I'll say. On the list I'm looking at,
I will agree with you there. I will agree with you there.
Could I go to my next sleeper then?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I'd rather have Jayden Daniels.
Wow.
I don't even think that's
Jayden Daniels was one of my possible busts.
Ooh. Why is that?
So I put this one in parentheses with like question marks around it because he is already at what, like 16 or 17. So this isn't really even like a starting quarterback option in most fantasy leagues. So I will say it with that kind of stipulation, but I just don't know if I trust, number one, the like 1 year breakout season. The track record of those guys in the NFL is very low. And then also the fact that he had all day at LSU, and I just do not know how he's going to fare behind just like a regular offensive line and facing much more pressure and not just being able to just like run around as much as he did at LSU. I just don't know if his play style is gonna, like, that is such a weird thing for me to say because I never say anything like that, but I legitimately don't know if his play style will translate.
Doesn't have to translate to being a good NFL quarterback to be a good fantasy quarterback. Justin Fields, in terms of points per game last year, finished tied with Patrick Mahomes. Running is so valuable. He likes to run. I think Washington will be not that good next year. And I think they're going to drop back a lot because of it. At quarterback 17, getting a guy who very easily could lead the NFL as far as quarterbacks go in rushing attempts is a total and complete steal, in my opinion. And I don't think that Washington's running game is going to be that strong, just straight up like handing the ball off, which I feel like specs even more into them, dropping back a lot with Kingsbury there and whatever. Now we'll see. I don't think it's a guarantee. I don't want to judge, or assume too much, but there's a lot of upside with Daniels. I mean, same thing with like the logic behind Anthony Richardson last year. If he had played a full season, his throwing numbers probably wouldn't have been that great, but he would have been a very fantasy relevant quarterback just based off how much he runs. I see the exact same thing in Daniels, to be completely honest with you, even though I don't think that Daniels is the prospect that Richardson is. On top of that, Washington's receivers could be worse. They are really not that bad. And if he wants to run around and bomb it down the field and take off if nobody's open, he's in a really, really good position to do it. Now, I'll say this. you are running a risk with him getting banged up because he runs around and he takes so many hits.
And he's
but you were
tiny.
also taking that you also took that risk with Justin Fields, and you also took that risk with Anthony Richardson. And nobody on this podcast had anything against that, and he did get hurt.
But the thing is, Daniels is tiny. Like, he's so much smaller than both Fields and Richardson.
Ignoring the injury thing, though, like, yeah, he could get banged up. Richardson could get banged up. Fields could get banged up. Like, okay, like that could happen. I guess my concern with Daniels is I think he's one of those guys that might be too up and down. Like, against a bad defense, could he rush for 150 yards and go crazy one week, and then that is like 2 weeks from somebody else? But I also don't think he's going to be immune to those, like, I don't know, like he's a rookie behind a bad offensive line, didn't love him as a prospect. Are there going to be those weeks where it's like, man, my starting quarterback just finished with 5 points because he threw 0 touchdowns. He had 12 rushes for 20 yards and he threw 2 picks. And I just think there's like, I don't think Herbert is ever going to have that next year. And I just think Jayden might win you some weeks and he might lose you some weeks, and he's going to be kind of inconsistent. And
he would be an interesting guy to have on your bench. I can say that much, but I wouldn't.
Yeah,
even
as a starter,
him as like my day one starter. I'd be very concerned.
Well, the good news is that he's quarterback 17 right now.
Right.
Yeah. But I to be completely honest, I completely disagree with the notion that quarterbacks who throw a lot or like strong pocket passers do not have down weeks. I think they absolutely do. It's because
but great quarterbacks don't have down weeks, I guess.
Well,
even Herbert did last year.
I had Stafford last year, and he had some really down weeks, man.
Fair enough.
I mean, even Herbert last year, I mean, would have single-digit games because any given game, if you're on a bad offense in particular, you can just not throw a touchdown, and that's a bad game. And there's no way out of it for those guys outside of they need to throw touchdowns. So I think that rushing value is, I mean, the single most important thing for fantasy quarterbacks. I mean, maybe not, like being really good, obviously, is more important, but I think you guys are underestimating how important running is. And I think I like that Daniels, okay, he's not going to be the most consistent guy ever, although I would argue that rushing ability gives you a higher floor. But the good news is that if you want somebody who's more consistent, you could take them, get like quarterback 10 or 11 off the board and then swing around and have a high upside backup, which is the type of play that I would prefer over maybe drafting some of these guys super, super high, particularly this year. I don't love the guys who are super, super high. But again, you can be super consistent and you can be really great, but Patrick Mahomes finished as quarterback 12 last year, and that's Mahomes.
Yep.
It's just really, really tough if you're not in the right offense for it that can generate those explosive plays and get you touchdowns. And Mahomes does run around, and it's like maybe that's too specific of an example of just one guy, but I think the bet on the rushing upside with Daniels is really strong, and I don't think it's been factored in enough. I don't think he's going to be super efficient. I don't think he's going to be like Washington's franchise quarterback for the next 15 years. I'm betting against that, to be honest. We've talked about this a million times. But do I think he's going to put up good fantasy numbers this year, at least? Yeah, I do.
Yeah, he could just have 1,000 rushing yards, and that's that in terms of value. It could happen.
I don't think he's going to be as good of a runner as Fields. And I
agree with that, though, Blaiden.
I think him taking a lot of hits which I guess Fields took a lot of hits the year that he ran for 1,000.
And Fields always got hurt.
That's a mute point.
Yeah, but like I said earlier, I don't want to talk too much about the injury thing. I don't know. I guess the other thing about Daniels is my whole take with the Washington offense is like it's not going to be that different than it was last year. They went from Bieniemy and Howell to like Cliff Kingsbury and Daniels, and it's like in terms of skill at those. And like Howell didn't like light it up, even though he
but
passed it more than anybody else in the league, and he was mobile. But
Howell finished a heck of a lot higher than 17 in fantasy scoring.
No, he didn't. Not really. He was like QB 22, I bet.
I'm
Not
looking
per
at
game,
12.
but if you told me right now that Daniels was going to get as many dropbacks as Howell did last year, I absolutely could promise you that he will finish higher than Justin Herbert. I think that would be.
I just don't think that's going to happen.
Guarantee.
He finished
maybe.
higher than Herbert last year in total points. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Per game numbers are definitely lower. But in terms of just like volume, I mean,
Howell was fantasy relevant, and then I think he finished the season like incredibly poorly. Regardless, Howell could not move
he
like
really
Daniels.
did.
And Daniels is...
you're right. You're right about that.
I don't think Daniels is quite as talented a runner as a Richardson or a Fields or an Allen. But because he does, like, he's still in that mode where he's not scared to take hits and has unlimited stamina, like, he racks up a lot of yards. And, like, honestly, it works. It might get him hurt eventually. So maybe you have a problem with that if you take that away from him. But, like, dude, it works, man. I think it'll be. I think Daniels will have some good games and some big plays, and I think the numbers will be big. I mean, again, I'm not that high on him long term, but like I'm not like totally out on him. I don't think it's like hopeless there, and I think, if this was like who is a guy like we really disliked Zach Wilson. It's not like that with Daniels for me at all. But
it's not quite like that, but it's strong enough that I just don't want to take him. Like I just don't. Like, I don't want someone bad. I don't want someone who could get benched. It's like, and Daniels, if he's really good, he's really good. But if he's just kind of like a poor rookie, I don't know. I don't know. I think the odds of that are just too high. That's a good question. Who is Washington's backup? He really doesn't have.
I mean, it's not
that much competition. Oh.
I don't know.
It's probably, who is it? Well, I'll tell you because it's coming up right now. It's Mariota, so you're right. He's not getting benched.
He's not getting benched.
I should have remembered that they wanted Mariota for some odd reason. Who knows?
They signed a lot of bizarre guys this offseason. I think that he will finish pretty well in fantasy. I do. But Blaiden, do you have a sleeper?
I do. My first sleeper is Dak Prescott, which before I get into this, I have a story to tell. I was at my parents' neighbor's daughter graduated high school. So we were at their graduation party. And I'm talking to some of the other neighborhood guys. And at one point I'm talking to my mom and I hear one of them say, "Yeah, I'm so glad the Cowboys decided to trade Dak this offseason." And I just like froze. And I was like, "What did you just say?" And he was like, "Yeah, they're trading him to the Dolphins, I think." I'm like, this had to have happened in like the last 30 minutes. Like, there's no way I didn't hear about this. And sure enough, it didn't. Obviously, you're listening to this show, you know that didn't happen because we would have opened with that.
And you would have heard about it on Twitter.
Right.
I assume you're not like listening to us for breaking news.
I would hope not. We've never been exactly one. Usually what happens is we record the episode and then after the breaking news comes. But yeah, I just thought that was so weird. And he was like, and the fact that he was like, "Thank God, man." I'm like, you do not want to be out here in this quarterback market.
But this
is why we rank
as to why Dak is a sleeper, though.
It is.
People just don't. They just think like the Cowboys are chokers and Dak chokes in the playoffs and he sucks, and that's why he's been kind of pushed down.
Yep, but he was
no doubt.
3 in fantasy scoring last year overall and top 5 per game. And nothing has really changed to make you think that he's not going to be up in that same conversation this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Dallas as a whole is like nothing has changed with Dallas. And I feel like so many people act like their window is closed now because they had another embarrassing playoff loss and that it's just time to give up on the Cowboys. And to some extent it could be. Like maybe it's fair to say we know Dak will never win a Super Bowl. But to say he won't be a top 6 quarterback in fantasy or to say anything you want about the Cowboys, it's not all true. There's not like unlimited slander warranted to them. And Dak is like the ultimate consistency guy that I'm talking about, where I don't care what
Yes.
happens in the game. Like the Cowboys could lose, he could throw some picks, like all of this could happen. I think that he'll throw yards and touchdowns. I just do. They don't have a running game.
He threw a lot of
Like,
them last year.
he threw a lot of them last year. He's thrown a lot of them for a lot of seasons in his career, honestly.
Yeah.
And he's just there. He's the team. Like, he's a top 5 MVP candidate, I think. He airs it out. And I know the rest of the weapons aren't good outside of CeeDee Lamb, but that's the case last year. Like, we were talking all of last year, like, hey, Brandon Cooks hasn't really done that much. Like, it's kind of all CeeDee and a little bit of Jake Ferguson. And yeah, that was the case. And that's probably going to be the case again this year. And Dak was really good to have
still
next
aren't going to
season,
be able to run the ball. And
yeah, I think there's no reason why I can't just repeat. I know that regression to the mean is the thing, but I think with him, this just kind of is the mean. I think he's very good.
That's what I was about to say. What is the mean here, right? Regression to the mean inquires that there is like a spot that he could regress to.
Yeah, it's like 10. Like, he's good. Like, he's always, I don't know, he throws a lot of yards. I think he's going to get a lot of touchdowns. So I agree with you, Blaiden. I would take him over CJ Stroud. How about that?
I might agree with you there.
And
the last full season he played, he was QB7 before like last year. So 2021 he was QB7, 2022 he was hurt, and then 2023 he was QB3.
Mm-hmm.
That Stroud comment, that is also one of my, again, this is where I don't want to say bust, but like, why is he quarterback 5? Is it because we're really excited about CJ Stroud? I mean, I don't think that it isn't going to happen. Like, we're just like, well, it's CJ. He's awesome. It's like, okay.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
He is. Don't get me wrong. I'm in the Ohio State hat, right? Here are the 4 quarterbacks being taken above him: Allen, Hurts, Lamar, who are all prolific runners. Right. So that's why they're getting taken that high. And Patrick Mahomes. And then after that, it's Stroud. And that's the first guy that we're going with. I just think what separates him from a Jordan Love or a Dak Prescott, or like realistically from a fantasy standpoint, even guys like, Purdy maybe, is just not super clear to me for him to be drafted that much higher. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a world where he just puts up the touchdown numbers this year, and he's, the guy who has like a Dak-like season, honestly. It's completely possible. But I think, and I think their offense is going to be good, and I think he's going to put up, about as strong numbers as you think. But they also like to run the ball there. And he hasn't proven that he can do that yet. And there's other passers that I feel like I could take that sort of have proven that or have that track record that I can get like kind of significantly later, like a full round plus later. And I just feel like any draft I go into, 10, 12 people, I'm not going to be the highest on Stroud out of everybody from a fantasy perspective. And if somebody else wants to reach and take him high, it's like, I just don't think
I'll let them
like
do it.
Like him beating quarterback 5 would be like a 45 passing touchdown season, which again is possible. But you have to get really, really high into it because he only had like 40 rushing attempts last year.
Yeah, I agree so much, Matt. And I love what you said about being in the draft and just not being the highest person there on Stroud, because it feels like everybody loves him. Everybody's going to want him. He's poised for the breakout when we just don't quite know if it's going to be him yet making the breakout right now. I think eventually he'll certainly get there. But sophomore slumps are real. And I was reading a blog from harvardsportsanalysis.org, and they talked about sophomore slumps. And they say, we can see from the green line, quarterbacks who perform better than average in their first year, that there is indeed a sophomore slump. From year 1 to year 2, we see a decline of 12.1% in QBR. And this is found to be statistically significant by running a t-test that compares each player's performance in his first and second year. So, I mean, I'll run with those numbers. If Harvard says it, I believe it. Just because you have a great rookie season doesn't mean you're necessarily poised to fully and totally break out the year after. And maybe Stroud will, maybe Stroud won't. But I think the numbers kind of say if you had to bet on him as QB5 or something, is it more likely he finishes above that or below that? He's one of the guys I feel most confident in that he could finish below because of what you said again, Matt. They like to run the football. Slowick love to do the run, pass combination on first and second down. They invested in running back this offseason too with Mixon. So I don't know if that mindset is necessarily going anywhere for sure. So yeah.
Yeah, I just don't love taking a quarterback who isn't really a rushing threat that high, because you're basically banking on him putting up historically great passing numbers, or like maybe not historically great, but best in the league passing numbers to make that mark, much less beat it. I mean, the only guy again above him is Patrick Mahomes, who I'm assuming had more rushing attempts, and even Mahomes at his ADP, I don't really love.
No, he's
Can we talk about that? Mahomes is one of my busts. Even though over like most of his career, I think in 2020 he finished as QB3, 2021 he finished as like QB2 or QB3. 2022 he finished as QB1. It was like him and Jalen Hurts at the top. But then last year he was what? What'd you say, Matt? QB8, QB9 overall?
I think he was QB8. But like in points per game, he was like 12 or something.
And do you feel super strongly that he will finish above that QB5 mark this year?
You're banking on Brown and Worthy bringing back a lot of the big play touchdowns, which isn't a crazy bet. As quarterback 3, I don't really hate it. He's kind of quarterback 3 by a lot, I feel like, or that's when you have to start really picking a guy in like the second and third round. And I think it's fair to question whether or not the upside is super, super crazy on betting that high that you'll end up getting quarterback 1 when you have to wonder like exactly how worth it is that versus taking a consistent running back or receiver or position that the downside is higher than, just the QB play is.
Taking a quarterback that high where he could finish a fair bit lower is very risky.
Mahomes is also a guy that always goes higher in like the average draft than maybe he's ranked online. Like, I feel like every draft with friends or family that I've done, Mahomes always goes first.
And Brady was the same way. It's the mark of a GOAT, I believe.
For me, it was always Watson.
Well, go figure. I played in some leagues where crazy things happen with Cam Newton. If you played in the right circles like I did, but I'm not super, super crazy about drafting Mahomes. It's just like kind of like a wacky play. Like honestly, the quarterback in the first 3 rounds in QB1 has always been not quite my style in general. I think Mahomes is a fair play at QB3 or QB4, wherever he is. But it's not like my favorite move. And I definitely could see Brown and Worthy are better, but it doesn't quite bring you back to like him crushing an MVP or whatever. But it totally could be. I'm not really willing to bet against Mahomes being super, super low.
Yeah, I mean, he's the best quarterback on the planet. But
yeah, I guess I think it's about fair. Fair because the people below him are like Stroud and like Anthony Richardson.
Right.
And Anthony Richardson, I would definitely rather have Mahomes than Anthony Richardson, as much as I love.
Yeah, it's like all the guys below Mahomes are guys were like, oh, yeah, they could also finish below their ADP. So maybe he is just properly rated at that point then. Except for maybe Lamar. Lamar might be a guy that I would consider putting over him.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So,
what's the craziest thing you guys have
Theo, you're muted. Oh, never mind.
Or any fantasy draft? I always remember a kid took, what was it? I think he took Matt. There was one year where Matt Forte went number 1 overall, and I remember all of us being super confused. But I actually don't think that ended up being a horrible move. And I also remember a year where like the Bills defense went in the 3rd round or something like that. And the other big fantasy reach memory that I have, I was sitting in on my parents' fantasy draft that they had for like a long time before I was even born. And as a little kid, I wasn't allowed to be in the league, although since I have joined, because they always are, people stop for a year or something, so I'll sit in. But at any rate, at that point, I was not allowed yet. And my uncle drafted Mercedes Lewis in like the 4th round, and none of like my parents and nobody had ever heard of him. And they were just giving him shit for such a long time. And when like he's had such a long career at this point, and I always think whenever he's highlighted about how long ago it was that everybody was yelling at my uncle for taking him.
That is
the only distinct fantasy memory I have from when I was a kid like that. Me and my brother had a team. I must have been 8 or 9 years old. Honestly, this might have been like the first time that Rodgers won MVP. So this was a while ago, and we made it to the championship game. I forget who all was on our squad, but the choice we had to make was that Rodgers was dealing with like a concussion and maybe wouldn't have gone. And our backup was Kellen Moore, I believe, who was playing for the Cowboys at the time. And we had started him the game before. I could be totally wrong about the details of this. I feel like we started him the game before and he was solid. And I remember my brother didn't want to put in Rodgers. I did. And then I went and changed it, like without him knowing, right before the game started.
Oh, no.
And we won because of that, because Rodgers did go and he was better and Moore put up like 8 points.
Oh, I thought this story was going to end with you getting like the shit beaten out of you by your older brother.
Because I blew the championship game.
I totally thought you were about to say like, yeah.
No, Matt's too Sigma for that, you know.
No way you just use Sigma is a real
I'd
adjective.
love to go back and figure out what game that was. I can't really remember, and maybe I'm like totally missed. 2011 seems right. I'd have to go look at the game log. Who knows?
Yeah, I can't quite remember. He was dealing with a concussion in 2010, but I think he sat and Matt Flynn started and they almost beat the Patriots. Maybe it could have been like the first game after that, if you're thinking the 2011 range. But that was in 2010. You would have been pretty young. You'd have been like 9 years old.
I don't know, because I'm not seeing when he missed a game. I mean, he missed a game in 2011, but it was the last game. Maybe it was in 2010, because he did miss a game then, but I don't know if that was. Yeah, who knows?
I have a lot of stories of reaches just from playing with Blaiden, honestly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Give me one.
I'm sorry. It must have been 2010. He misses week 14.
Yep.
Or week 15, and then he comes back week 15, which would have been championship weekend, 404 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks.
Oh, there we go. I know ball. I know my Aaron Rodgers history.
There you go. Theo, what reaches are you referring to?
With you?
Yeah.
I mean, they're a recorded history, man. I remember you saying Miles Sanders was good. I remember you drafting him.
Ooh, yeah.
I remember you drafting all quarterbacks and then not having any other skill position players in the 32-man fantasy league.
32-man. Well, my thought was, okay, most people are going to be out here with pretty bad quarterbacks, but then all of my quarterbacks got hurt. So
still a bad strategy. I was trying to
play because had they all been healthy, they would have all been good.
This strategy doesn't work because they depreciate the quarterbacks depreciate as soon as they're off the lot, I'm afraid. Like, you draft them and then I'm going to trade them, but like trading, it's harder to extract value, I think, from a trade than it is just drafting a guy that you like. Because
but again,
that guy,
my plan was I took, who did I take? I took Anthony Richardson, Stafford, and one other guy, and Daniel Jones, and they all got hurt except for Stafford most of the time.
This strategy didn't make any sense.
Yeah, you're not addressing what I'm saying. I understand they get hurt. But if your choice is between like I don't know. Like, you liked Rashee Rice. If your choice is between like drafting Rashee Rice or Daniel Jones, and then you take Daniel Jones with the plan, I'm going to trade him later for Rashee Rice. Like, what is that strategy? Like,
it's not that I'm trying to trade for a specific player.
In
My thought is it's a 32-man league. Someone is going to be out here with a completely horrendous quarterback, and they are going to be desperate to move off.
You ended up being just as desperate because it's a 32-man league and you didn't have any
wide receiver. And like, why were they all on your team when they got hurt? Like, wouldn't that trade happen before the season even starts because someone's realizing they don't have a quarterback? And again, like Matt said,
the idea was to do it later in the year when people got desperate.
Why wouldn't they be desperate early?
Look, I'm not denying that this didn't work out, and I won't do it again.
It would never work. Like, this plan was doomed from the beginning.
You're just
do we want to get back
man.
to the sleepers in the bus?
Yes. I'm sorry. I derailed the whole conversation.
No, you're fine. I have a sleeper.
There we go.
Who I think is being drafted a little low and it feels pretty consistent and pretty reliable. I really like Kyler Murray this year. He's going around quarterback 10 at the moment. Last year when he came in, he did not miss a beat. He was fantasy startable. I think he was quarterback 9 in points per game in like a 6-game stretch, fresh off an injury on a bad offense. It really wasn't, popping off like that. I think there's a lot to like here. Again, he feels pretty reliable. He's done it before. We've seen some stretches of MVP play from him. He can run. His offense got a big upgrade. He's going to have more time getting past that injury. He should be fresher. He's going to have a whole offseason with the team and a new system. Like, I think there's a ton of reasons to think that he could perform better. And even if he doesn't, even if he looks about like he did last year and having a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr. just makes no difference and the touchdowns just don't fall his way, you're not exactly banking on a lot of those things to break your way for him to even just hold his weight and make his ADP. Now, sure, there's some injury risk with him, of course, because he's coming off an injury and he likes to run. But I think he's you could risk that with just about anybody at this point, to be completely honest with you. So I think there's a lot of green signs, a lot of check marks, a lot of positives here.
I'd be super excited to draft Kyler. He was my other one. He was my sleeper last year too. I know we did this kind of same episode, and I was like, just wait. If you can just wait the 8 weeks, he'll come back and you've got like a really good starter on your hands. And I think that's
exactly what happened.
That kind of happened. Like, I keep talking about per game, per drop back. Even I have access to fantasy points, like per drop back numbers. And he did really well in those categories. Like, and that was without a wide receiver hardly at all. So I'm totally with you. Like, Kyler would totally be one of my targets. I just don't really see much. He's been hurt pretty consistently. That's the only thing that annoys me. But
there is some risk there. But I mean, if he's great, he'll be.
Yeah, I think if he's on the field, there's not a lot of downside with taking him where he's at all.
Yeah,
his last 4 seasons outside of his rookie year, 9th in points per game, 9th in points per game, 4th in points per game, 5th in points per game.
And I think now with McBride and Harrison, and like, this is his best group of weapons and probably his best coordinator. So it's like he could finish crazy high. Like, if you're thinking about it like as bullishly as possible, like he's got that kind of got that dark horse MVP. It's like, I don't think he's gonna win, but I really think that the upside is there with him.
It is.
Yeah, and I'm questioning, it's like, why do we like him to finish, behind that first group of quarterbacks less than a Stroud with Kyler's history of production, I guess it's just the injury stuff, and I guess we don't know, Stroud is the mystery box, like exactly how big of a jump could he take here, and it could be pretty big.
Yeah.
But give me Kyler where he's being taken. That might be my favorite thing to do at quarterback is go Kyler and then switch around and get my backup as Daniels, to be honest with you, and feel really strong at QB.
I
might not
totally
be the
agree.
worst
That
strategy in the
8-9
world.
spot, Dak Prescott or Kyler. And then Jordan Love in that number 10 spot. Like, I really think that those three, just kind of in general, are a
Yeah,
good kind of a
and Love
sweet
is a
spot
guy
to
who
take
I
him at.
really like. I really like that offense, and it feels like if I want to take a bet on one of those guys to have like a big, huge, like maybe they take a swing at MVP. I mean, I think Stroud and Love have like, I feel kind of decently even odds, it almost seems like, but I can get Love a little bit later. I'm probably going to end up taking Love a little bit more consistently. It's also easier if you really like one of the Packers receivers to sort of build that stack up because they're not getting taken as high.
Love and Wicks.
Yeah, I mean, really,
I feel like
I
we
think
could
that's
build a
such
really good pun name out of those two as well somehow.
we definitely could. I
Maybe.
can't think of any. I'm not good at that type of stuff. But
Eventually,
Jordan
you
Love
could.
definitely has a very pun friendly name for what that's worth.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Did I already talk about Richardson at 6 on this list?
No,
No, you didn't.
we've briefly mentioned Richardson in passing. I don't
I
know
just
how to
think you
feel
can't
about
take
him.
Richardson that high. Like, I already said that, I
Yeah.
think, but that is just so crazy to me. Like, we saw such a brief glimpse, and I know that he was like number 1 in fantasy points per touch or something like that. I see all the fantasy people being like, dude, Richardson, when he played last year, like off the charts good. And he was one of my sleepers last year because of the running thing and the fact that I was kind of high on him in the draft. But now it's gone way too far. It's gone way too far. Do not take, like, over Joe Burrow.
Yeah.
Over Dak and Kyler, and I just don't know about all that. He seems like the ultimate mystery box, and maybe I'm a coward, but that's just the kind of thing where I'm like, I 6 off of
I want Richardson on my
that.
team, but I don't want to draft him that high.
Like, my
Well,
last year was just the time to get in on him because I feel like he was going pretty low. He was like quarterback. People weren't even sure if he was going to be the starter for a little bit. I don't know. He was way low last year because he was a rookie, you know. And now he just hasn't proven that much more, and he's had this huge jump. And he was, again, really good in fantasy. He scored a bunch of rushing touchdowns. I guess maybe I could see it if you want to get really, maybe he's a league winner, and the boom and bust thing is just so high. But again, it's like, if you simulated it a bunch of times, I do think the numbers would tell you that Richardson is a pretty safe bet to be being overdrafted right now if you were to talk about an average outcome.
Yeah. I would
I think
agree.
6. I think 6 is probably about fair for Richardson, I have to say. I just think the rushing upside and the fact that he's so big and will probably lead to rushing touchdowns is just too much of a floor raiser. It's definitely a mystery box, but if he hits, I mean, he'll be one of the best.
You're right. Maybe I
quarterbacks
should
in
go on
fantasy.
potential. You're not drafting to finish 3rd, which is maybe what I'm doing here.
But even then, I mean, if Richardson plays, which is a fair if, but how many guys have we said that for now?
Right.
If Richardson is like on the field, dude, what exactly is going to happen for him to finish as like quarterback 15? I just can't see it, man. Like, you have to think that he just completely stops running or something, man. Maybe the
You're
rushing
right.
touchdowns just don't fall his way. That would be my fear, is that what if they get nervous using him around the goal line or something, and that takes some touches and they stick with Taylor? That could be my concern, but I think it's just as likely that he goes crazy on some, I mean, I'm gonna make the comp on some Cam Newton stuff. And he's just such a weapon down there that's what they drafted him for. They're going to run him, and he's going to finish with double-digit rushing touchdowns, and that's going to make him at least as good as his ADP, if not better, I think.
Yeah, maybe I should. Maybe I do believe in the upside, so I'm so
so
in
do
on
I.
the Anthony Richardson stuff
just-
that maybe I just shouldn't even take my foot off the gas and say like take him number 1 or something.
I just don't want to draft him that high. I don't know.
It's probably not the move that I'm going to make a lot, because I still agree that it's a mystery box because he could get hurt. We don't know how they're like, you're relying a lot on those rushing touchdowns, which he had, 4 of in 4 games, and he didn't even complete the 4th last year. But again, like, could they maybe possibly try to run him a little bit less because of the injury, or could they, go to Taylor at the goal line more? Maybe.
Yeah, it's just the only quarterbacks that I'm really thinking about that I would even consider taking like top 50 are like Allen, Lamar, and Hurts. Like, and outside of that, I just don't really feel comfortable taking anyone else.
That's fair. How do you feel about the top 2, Allen and Jalen Hurts?
I think
right?
that makes sense.
I think that's right.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. My only thing is, like, I don't know if they're going to have as many. Do you think they'll have as many Philly special or not Philly specials? It's the wrong trick play. Tush pushes without Kelsey.
It's hard to say, but the Eagles are historically pretty good at getting new offensive linemen. I mean, they found Jordan Mailata like in rugby, and now he's like one of the best offensive linemen in the league. Like, okay,
yeah, true.
Hurts had
I don't really feel strongly one way or
last
another.
year. That is pretty nuts. I mean, because who else would you be betting on? Like, I'm saying on average outcomes, because we're only talking about pretty established guys right now. So like, who would you be betting on to finish like averagely better than him? Mahomes, he didn't really run enough. He's coming off not the greatest season in the world. Like, I get it, but I feel like if I'm taking somebody crazy high, they're gonna have rushing upside. Lamar, well, his passing numbers are never that crazy, and he's only sort of been like taking his foot off the rushing gas pedal more and more. I thought he deserved MVP last year. Don't get it twisted. But he finished as like quarterback 3 last year. Or
behind Hurts.
Even as the MVP, behind Hurts. Maybe the tush pushes slow down a little bit, but I think it's actually a mix of things. I feel like that's such a big part of their identity that I doubt they are relying exclusively on Kelsey for that. And Hurts is a great goal line weapon in his own right. So I think it's pretty fair. I think it's pretty fair to have them 1 and 2.
I do think Jalen Hurts deserves just as much credit for the tush push as the guys up front.
That's fair. That's fair too. How do you feel about Purdy and Tua at 11 and 12? Do you think they'll continue, like, because Twitter and this podcast and like film Twitter, I guess, is always kind of poo-pooing Purdy and Tua, but they do put up crazy numbers every year, right?
They do.
And so the 11 and 12 are kind of the balance. Do you think they'll continue to put up crazy numbers, or do you think that eventually they'll kind of regress to where we think they rank in a quarterback?
Purdy is currently Purdy was 6th last year in total. Tua was 9th. I mean, I could see it going worse, but if it does, where would I have them finishing? Where do they finish in
the per game? Because once you start to get past like QB 5 or 6, it really comes down to like who missed a game and who didn't.
6. Purdy was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Tua was 20.
Damn.
Yeah. I think that Purdy is pretty fair, but I like some of the other guys. I feel like Love could have, a big MVP competitive season. Dak, like he did last year. We've already talked about Kyler. Purdy, I think, will be solid and will meet his ADP. But he's not going to be my go-to pick. I wouldn't be mad if I had to take him, but he's not going to be my go-to pick. Tua, I'm really, unless the touch, like I feel like what we're gambling on here, just more touchdowns to go his way, less rushing touchdowns, more passing touchdowns that break the fall for him, because he was in a great offense last year and just didn't produce like a crazy fantasy QB. And he really hasn't had like a ton of rushing in his game.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's crazy to expect him to finish like he did, last year, maybe even a little bit better as he continues to get older. But he could also get, banged up or whatever. And I just think there's other dudes with bigger upsides, to be honest. So he's really somebody I'm probably not going to be taking all that often.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where
Herbert or them.
Herbert or Tua, or like I would take Herbert last of those three.
Ooh, okay. How about
I would take Herbert last of those three. Purdy and Tua are in great offenses.
Yeah.
I have two guys to ask you about that are back to back also.
Okay.
Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith.
They're fine backups. And quarterback too. They're fine.
Baker Mayfield was top 10 last year. Geno Smith was top 5 the year before.
Where did Baker finish in points per game?
Points per game, he was lower.
Yeah, like Baker, and he's being taken at like quarterback like 18, and he probably finished around quarterback 18 in points per game. And I think if he plays a full season and a few of the guys ahead of him get hurt, like they definitely will, he'll probably finish a little bit higher. But he's a backup. He doesn't. This is my thing. It's like we're talking about a lot of guys who I think will probably meet expectations, assuming they play, or probably won't be disasters. Although Geno was not good last year in fantasy. He was a very bad pick.
No, but they also had a very weird offensive line situation where they already had one of the worst interior offensive lines in football, and then both of their tackles got hurt. So their offensive line was just a complete dumpster fire. And no other how many quarterbacks had that happen to them last year?
Not too many. I do think Geno will do a lot better than his projection.
I think so. I believe in Geno a little bit. But here's what I would say. We're talking about a bunch of guys who, if you're taking a Purdy or a Tua or a Herbert, you realize that they're probably not going to finish as quarterback 3. The idea is that they're solid starters. Herbert, unless you think that, like, I know he hit 5,000 yards one year, but there's really nothing signaling that he's going to have a better year this year than last year. If that is all we are talking about, you can throw Goff into this category too, right? I guess any one of these guys could go super crazy. This is grouping them all together, being super general. Any one of these guys could go super crazy, and maybe there's different aspects about their situations or them as players that you like, but I'm probably going to take them in order of how good their situation is and how good their offense is. Like, yeah, I think Herbert's better than Purdy, but Purdy plays for the 49ers. I don't even think it's like I'd rather bet on that than on Herbert overcoming an offense that potentially could just like not want to throw as much and doesn't have good receivers. It's like I just don't know, man. So I'm not super high on him, even though I love Herbert as a quarterback. I think he's top 5 or whatever. Fantasy's a whole different beast.
It is a different beast. I do think if anyone is regression to the mean worthy, it's Geno Smith. He was like 5th in scoring 2 years ago. Then he was like 20th last year, and he's being billed as 23. I think that's a fair guy to be like, yeah, he could be like top 15.
I definitely
that would
think
be
Geno's
regression to the mean. Yes,
definitely.
I mean, like Geno. He's going pretty late, so I don't hate that. But
I feel like there's half of Twitter out there, or like half of people who think like him and Howell is going to be a battle, or like Geno had a fluke year and then fell off last year, when neither of those things are remotely true. And
yeah,
I just don't think a lot of people even know that. I think a lot, like, it's just the general narrative is not that at all. So, whereas Baker, I think he's in a bit of a different conversation because Baker's been so up and down his whole career.
Right.
So, and people like Baker, they're buying the up right now. Whereas Geno is probably...
I don't hate buying the up on Baker. I mean, he did have his best year last year. Like, it's not like he had his best year in Cleveland and last year was like almost getting back to that. Like, he did play his best football last year, no doubt. He had 28 touchdowns, 10 picks. That's 4,000 yards. That's a pretty good year. But I mean,
and he still was like a borderline starter in quarterback 1. He really was a good backup.
Yeah. And the other thing about Baker is like a good defense. Like, I really think, again, He's one of those
Right.
dudes that 0 point game, that -1 point game is like looming at any moment. And against Geno, I think he
Baker's not
can.
gonna have a -1 point game. There's no way, right?
One little, yeah, you're right. They got Graham Barton now.
Yeah.
He'll save him. But
So true.
anyway,
That's about all I got.
All right, yeah, I think those are. Yeah, I think we've talked about pretty much everyone.
I
Oh,
think so.
one more guy that we haven't really touched on. We've like touched on him in passing. How do you guys feel about Joe Burrow?
What's he like, quarterback?
He's like right behind
7?
Richardson, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, that's probably about fair.
think so.
yeah, I think he's gonna. Even though he was really down in a lot of the statistics last year, I think he's gonna bounce back in a big way now that he's maybe healthy. I saw some quote from him that he said like, "Oh yeah, I'm on track to play week 1," and I'm like, on track. Like,
what else do you want him to say, man?
I don't know, just maybe something with a little bit more like, "I'm all good. I'm ready to play right now."
Yeah,
He had some
I guess,
quote
if,
that
I
was
guess if you're
like,
gonna be vague, don't.
That well,
Yeah,
it's not. It's that he's saying he's still working back from the injury. You'd kind of be
Yeah,
hoping
exactly.
that like it wasn't a question that he was going to
yeah.
play week
exactly,
1.
exactly. So
Like,
that's the
like,
thing that
imagine-
concerns me. Go ahead.
Imagine if I don't know, I'll try to like Amari
No.
Cooper was like, I'm on track to play week 1. You'd be like, wait, what? Like, yeah, like what happened? Like, what are you? Why would you not? That's sort of the thing with Burrow. I know he's coming off an injury, but it's like, why?
I thought you were
hope
about to
so.
say Nick Chubb, man. I was like, don't
No,
talk about my boy
because
like
Nick Chubb
that.
really is the type of guy who's coming back from an injury that.
Yeah, I don't think Nick Chubb could even say I'm on track. I don't think Nick Chubb could even say that. I don't know if
Nick
you can comprehend.
Chubb's gonna say, "I'm on track to play in the preseason because I just want to compete so much."
I wish I could live inside your brain. 'Cause I know that that's actually the reality. You may pretend that you're just joking, but as soon as the laptop closes, I know that you like go out and smile and look at the blue sunny sky and say, Nick Chubb is such a beast. He's gonna rush for 100 yards preseason first half.
You know, it's funny at the grad party that I was at. One of the guys was like, "So how do you think Nick Chubb's gonna come back?" And I was like, "God, I hope so. I need him." And he's like, "You need him?" And I'm like, "Yes." He's like, "Is he on your fantasy team or something?" I'm like, "No, I just
You need
him."
him in other ways. Yeah. But yeah, Burrow. I think Burton is a good pick. T. Higgins signed his tender. He's gonna play again. Jamar Chase is good. Like,
Right.
I do think that the Bengals did a nice job retooling this offseason, and I think a healthy Burrow.
But okay, T. Higgins could still not
definitely
play
be
in
top
Cincinnati
7.
next year. That would be
think
the
he's
only thing.
Until T. Higgins
I would
gets
be
traded,
nervous. I would be nervous though of picking Burrow, knowing that at any point T. Higgins could just not be on the team.
I think it's less likely that he gets moved now that the season is, kind of rolling around here, and he didn't get moved.
Okay.
Like around the draft. I feel pretty
Yeah.
decently about it.
Okay.
That wouldn't be my big concern.
Yeah, I haven't heard much. I've heard more about an Ayuk trade than a T. Higgins trade. It would be
Yeah,
totally out
I
of
guess
nowhere
that's
at this
true.
point.
I guess that's true. But okay.
Yeah.
That's all I have then. So
Sweet.
thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Stay Hot. It's been an absolute blast. We've got lots of fun stuff coming your way on the horizon, some live streams, some collabs with some very, very special friends of ours. And yeah, stay tuned. Should be a great ride. But until then, and until next time, we will catch you on the flippity flop.